So some of you may have already been privy to the fact that today is considered VE Day for the majority of Europe. It's a day to celebrate victory against the Nazis in World War II. But tomorrow, the 9th, is a day that the rest of the world, and really even the Allies, should be celebrating probably more so than today, which is Victory Day, where there will be a huge parade in Russia to celebrate their victory against the Nazis. Now, if you've probably been paying attention over the last 4 years, you've probably realized that for some reason, the rest of Western Europe seems to have forgotten why Russia has special privileges when it comes to claiming a victory day against Nazis and Nazi Germany. Because it was Russia that lost 27 million people, but it was also Russia that was the reason the Allies were even able to claim victory. And it was Russia who took the brunt of the bruises that came during World War II because of their unique position and the fact that Hitler realized at a certain point he couldn't win unless he took out Russia. And I find it interesting that as VE Day is being celebrated in Germany, England, and all over Western Europe, Russian flags are being banned from use. German police have literally banned Russian flags, guys. I know, it's kind of weird to celebrate a victory against Nazis. It's weird to celebrate a victory in World War II without acknowledging the USSR or Russia, but literally paraphernalia from the USSR has been banned in Germany. So in England, Ukraine flags are allowed. In fact, there are Ukrainian soldiers marching alongside British soldiers in solidarity with one another. Now, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the irony of British soldiers walking alongside a neo-Nazi-led military on Victory Day. A Victory Day, or a VE Day rather, that's supposed to celebrate victory against Nazis. I don't know if they realize the irony, but here I definitely do. Now, as important as it is to acknowledge why Victory Day is so important to Russia, I think it's even more important to acknowledge why we even have to have a Victory Day, why Russia had to lose 27 million people. And it's because the very people that have removed Russia from the World Cup, the very people that have removed Russia from competing officially in the Olympics, the very people that have removed or have tried to remove Russia and the USSR from history are largely the cause of the war. They're largely the reason that there is a Nazi Germany that had to be defeated to begin with. What do I mean by that? Well, without getting into all the nuance of how World War II was started because of the lies on top of the lies on top of the lies that the Allies made about Germany, we can just start from 1919, the Treaty of Versailles, where there was an agreement that Germany would maintain no more than 100,000 soldiers, that they would be crippled militarily, that they could not expand. In fact, they lost roughly 13% of their territory, and they were not allowed to conscript anybody into the military ever again. Obviously, things didn't really go down like that, did it? Because shortly after that, Hitler took over. Now, it's not like Hitler came in with a bunch of flowers, some Hershey's Kisses, some goodwill, some barbecue chicken, sat down with everybody at a picnic table, said, hey guys, I think we should make some peace. I think we should work together. Let's collaborate and figure out a way that would benefit the entire world. And let's make Germany better and greater than what it once was. No, that's not what happened. See, Hitler killed a bunch of people. That's how he came into power. I mean, that's a short version of it, but yeah, Hitler was a murderer. And if I recall, it was called the Night of the Long Knives, where he really consolidated all the power and killed like 70 people to get to the position that he was in. Now, he started conscription again right around that same time. The Treaty of Versailles forbade it. Do you know what France did? They held some protests in the streets. Okay, not really sure what that's going to do, but that's what they did. Do you know what the United States did? Absolutely nothing, because they believed in maintaining an isolationist position when it came to Germany. Oh, but Great Britain, they take the cake. Because you know what Great Britain did? They actually held the belief that the Treaty of Versailles was too punitive, that they punished them too harshly. And instead of punishing Germany and Hitler, who I just told you all literally murdered people to get in the position that he was in, instead of punishing them, they made a deal with them. They made a deal called the Anglo-German Naval Agreement, where Hitler and Nazi Germany was allowed to build up a naval fleet of roughly 33% the capacity of Great Britain. I'm not exactly sure how you're going to keep a bunch of Nazis in check when you're arming them to the teeth. But it doesn't just stop there, ladies and gentlemen. Shortly after that, about a year or so, it was 1936. Hitler made a phone call, said, hey, man, I think we want to hold the Olympics here. Just make sure you don't bring those Jews and we're all good. In fact, a lot of people don't realize that's how Jesse Owens was allowed to run. It's because, unfortunately, the Jewish sprinters weren't allowed to. I'm not really sure why Hitler was more okay with black people running than Jewish people, but that, I guess, just demonstrates how much he despised Jewish people at the time. Now, all of the countries that participated in the Olympics that year were privy to this, obviously, because their Jewish runners weren't allowed to run. The Jewish competitors weren't allowed to compete. But not only that, simultaneously, alongside these Olympics, there was a protest Olympics taking place that included roughly 6,000 competitors. Now, for comparison, there were 11,000 competitors in the World Olympics this year. So in 36, in Barcelona, Spain, 6,000 competitors from around the world were competing in, or whether they were going to compete rather, in protests of the Olympics that were going to be held in Berlin. So it wasn't as if the United States, Great Britain, France, and the rest of their allies could pretend that Hitler was a saint, that people were not upset and pissed off, that they were uplifting this anti-Semite, that they were uplifting a murderer, that they were uplifting a dictator. They couldn't pretend, because there were protests around the world when they announced these Olympics. The chair of the Olympic Committee was put under a lot of pressure in the U.S. to not allow the U.S. to compete, even though he ultimately did allow them to compete. And they're parallel to the Olympics. There were scheduled an entirely different set of the Olympics. The only thing that stopped it from happening was the Spanish Revolution that happened 2 days before it was set to take off. Now, of course, we don't learn about that in the history books, do we? We can talk about the fact that companies like Ford, GM, and GNC ultimately had to sue the United States, because we later found out that the United States bombed their Nazi subsidiaries. In other words, Ford, GM, GNC, and the like were manufacturing military weaponry, vehicles, everything you could think of and everything that you would need to start a war. They were manufacturing for Nazis. In order to do so, obviously, the United States federal government would have had to approve such an act. In other words, Hitler wouldn't have been able to fight a war. There would have been no blitzkrieg without the help of the manufacturing industry of the United States and other countries as well. So why do we have a victory day? Why do we have a victory day? We have a victory day because despite every sign, every signal that you could possibly receive, hey, this guy's a psychopath, if we allow him to continue arming himself at this rate, if we allow him to continue building up his military at this rate, if we allow him to continue to push the propaganda that he's been able to push on the world, and we allow him to continue to do this unchecked while arming him to the teeth, this will inevitably lead to a war. One could argue Now, this is just my opinion. One could argue there wouldn't be a necessity for a victory day if the Allied powers didn't help Hitler every chance they get, whether it be directly or indirectly. And despite the fact that the Allied powers did everything in their power to seemingly help Hitler start World War II, they turn, and then, of course, Russia loses 27 million people trying to fight back Hitler. How do they repay Russia? After the Allied powers finally defeat Hitler, I won't say they defeated Nazism, but I will say they defeated Hitler because, I mean, if they defeated Nazism, a lot of your tax dollars in the UK and a lot of our tax dollars in the US probably wouldn't be going to neo-Nazis in Ukraine. So I can't say confidently that we defeated Nazism. And there's another reason I can't say confidently we defeated Nazism. Because they repaid Russia by creating NATO not even 4 years later. The sole goal of NATO was to destroy the USSR. After creating the circumstances that led to a World War II, that led to the rise of Hitler, that led to his armament, that led to him having one of the most powerful militaries in the world, they created NATO to attack and destroy the nation that helped defeat the man that caused all of these problems, that was responsible for the Holocaust, that created the Axis powers with working alongside Japan and Spain and Italy. Like, I'm still a little confused as to how we arrived at that point in about 3.5 years. Because it was April, 3.5 years later, that they decided, yeah, I think we're going to actually go after Russia now. So that's how they thank them. They thank them by constantly ignoring every agreement, every conversation, every treaty where they said they would not encroach on Russia's sovereignty by pushing NATO further south, further towards Russia's border. They provoked them over and over and over and over again. Even more interesting, it wasn't like, I mean, given that Russia lost, or rather at the time, USSR lost 27 million people, you would assume that they would be put in some of the most powerful international positions in the world, in the institutions that were constructed to follow to prevent another war like that from happening. But no, you know who they put in charge instead? Literally a bunch of Nazis. Whether it be NATO, whether it be NASA, whether it be the United Nations, whether it be the EU Commission, you couldn't turn your head. You couldn't blink. You couldn't turn a television screen or turn a news station without seeing someone who was literally wearing a swastika like 2 days ago giving a speech on behalf of the Western world in a leadership position, a consequential leadership position. Did you see that from Russia? Was Russia rewarded for the sacrifices that they made? Because it isn't like they just made those sacrifices in one war. That wasn't the first time that they had been allied with the Allied powers. Or better yet, have we seen any accountability for how the West contributed to the very Nazis they are prancing around Western Europe and even some parts of the United States claiming that they defeated? No accountability whatsoever. No accountability and apparently no self-awareness. See, there are a lot of things in the history books that either don't get mentioned enough or get completely ignored or omitted. And a lot of what I talked about today is some of it. How many of you knew that there was an Olympics that was set to run parallel to the Berlin Olympics? How many of you knew that Great Britain, the same Great Britain that was nearly decimated, rather the same England that was nearly decimated by Germany, They were the reason that Germany was able to have a naval fleet, ladies and gentlemen. They said they weren't hard enough on Germany. Or excuse me, they were too hard. They were too hard. That the rest of the world was too hard on Germany, that Great Britain itself was too hard on Germany, and they helped to rearm them. They literally gave them the weapons that were used to bomb them into oblivion. Who was held accountable for that? These NATO powers, ladies and gentlemen, would have you believe that Russia is the enemy for defending its sovereignty, when Russia's propensity to protect its sovereignty, not like soldiers, not even necessarily soldiers trained, and this is what they do every day. I mean, every Russian's propensity to protect their sovereignty is the only reason, perhaps, that we're not all speaking German today. And it wasn't Russia that was protecting Hitler at every turn. It wasn't Russia who allowed the Treaty of Versailles to be violated at every turn. And when Russia finally had to step in to make a deal to try and protect themselves from the consequences of the West allowing Hitler to gain that level of power, and was ultimately betrayed, of course, which I'm pretty sure they anticipated happening. But when they had to defend themselves, there wasn't just blood spilled from soldiers. It was blood spilled by everybody. I mean, Putin's own family died on the front lines. He has family members who died on the front line, and that's what he will be celebrating tomorrow. There are people who have grandparents who died on the front line, or died and they weren't even part of the fight. That's what they'll be celebrating tomorrow. And these Western European nations, these NATO countries, if you will, have the audacity to remove Russia from sports competitions, to remove Russian flags out of the celebration of the victory against the Nazis, to try and erase Russia from history. The level of audacity, the level of ego the level of hubris that's on full display by Europe, the United States, and the rest of the NATO West is exactly why they are taking L after L after L from around the world. Whether it be losing Burkina Faso, losing Mali, losing Niger, losing this war in Ukraine at the hands of Russia, not really being sure on what side of the fence Saudi Arabia is on because they don't really trust NATO powers anymore. The only victory that they might be able to claim over the last several years is Syria, and we're not really sure how long that's going to last. Because let's be clear, the new Syrian leadership seems pretty incompetent. So the level of hubris that we've seen from NATO over the last 50 or 60 years is actually catching up with them. And the fact that you believe that you can have a day of celebration of victory over Nazis without including Russia is very reminiscent of the last couple of years where you thought that you could have a world economy that didn't include Russia. And how did that work out for you guys? Because last I checked, y'all are still scrambling to figure out who to blame. I mean, Liberation Day for Trump didn't really turn out to be all that liberating, did it? And tariffs didn't turn out to work out the way he thought it was going to. There's a bunch of infighting between the European countries and America. They don't know who to trust. They don't even know who's competent enough to lead them forward. Meanwhile, Russia has had the strongest economy that it's had in a very long time. In fact, one of Russia's top officials came out and said, whenever he was asked, well, how would it feel to be part of the world economy again? You know what he said? Yeah, we don't need you. We're good. We're actually better off. We're fine. Thank you. The world thought that they could omit Russia from history. And every single day since they started this process, they're finding out there is no history without Russia. And you can pay off your proxies, like in Ukraine. You can pay off, you can try to assassinate them. You can try to erase them from the history books. But fortunately, we live in an age of information now, ladies and gentlemen. We live in an age where I could tell you about how Nazis were propped up by the West and these NATO powers, and you could just go confirm it. I can tell you how often and how much leeway Putin gave Ukraine and NATO before it had to take action to protect its borders. But you could go and confirm it. We all know that Hitler was Time Man of the Year, but not just once. He was mentioned in time before that. He was being celebrated. You could go confirm that. No matter how much y'all try to erase history, erase Russia from history, it won't work. You cannot erase the fact that it is Russia right now who is allying itself with Burkina Faso at a time when it is needed most as a superpower to make sure that they can combat the terrorists that the West put there and the economic sanctions that they're trying to instill on Burkina Faso. We remember how Russia put bodies on the line to try and protect the sovereignty of Syria while still trying to protect their sovereignty at home. We remember how Russia had to literally fight for its sovereignty against a country that used to be a part of Ukraine was part of Russia. Now, if you say that now, apparently that means you're a Putin puppet, but no, that's the truth, guys. We also remember how the Azov battalion, a neo-Nazi battalion, was rewarded for helping to overthrow the government of Ukraine and became official as a part of the military of Ukraine. And yet the United States government continued to fund it, continued to push this war. They laughed and insulted Putin when he said that this is a war against Nazism. And now you understand why Victory Day is so important to them. And it is not just important for Russia. It is a day where we all need to stop, take a step back, and remember why we're not all speaking German right now. Not that there's anything wrong with German. You know, that's not a particularly easy language to learn, but it's important for us to remember their Victory Day, because their Victory Day is foundationalized in a truth of how we came here, how we got here. And by acknowledging their Victory Day and studying their Victory Day, we also learn about our individual countries' acknowledgement, whether you be from the UK, whether you might be from the United States or any of the NATO powers. You learn about your country's hand in the creation of the very monster they're trying to take credit for slaying. So as there are many people that will be gathering tomorrow in Russia, in Moscow, make sure that you take time to try to go on social media and find some translations if you need to. Look at the parade. Look at the celebrations. Look at the passion. Study. Understand what it means to them. Understand our part. If you're an American, it's important for you to understand your part, our part as a country. Our ignorance allowed Nazism to flourish. If you're British, our ignorance allowed Nazism to flourish. French, our ignorance, all of us. They had a whole Olympics and everybody's like, yeah, I'm just going to watch the Olympics. I'm learning, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if y'all know this. I'm Black. And I'm learning about the Black history of Jesse Owens, the sprinter. And guess what? I had no idea that at the time, I had no idea that my Black history was being used to paint over the image of a monster that was Hitler. In the US, the country that I was born in, was a part of that. That in and of itself is offensive. So that's what Victory Day, if you live outside of Russia, that's what Victory Day should be for you. It should be a moment to take a step back, look back, and reflect. How did we get here exactly? And why do we keep allowing the United States to claim that they're the reason we won World War II after it was Russia, or rather the USSR, that sacrificed 27 million people, that put Hitler and Nazi Germany on their back heels? And if the US and the West and NATO, if they hate Nazis so much, why is it that my tax dollars keep ending up in their pockets? Why is it that our manufacturing companies, weapons manufacturers, vehicle manufacturers even, why is it that their weapons, their vehicles, their products keep ending up in the hands of Nazis? Why is it that for some reason in Ukraine, they're sending people to train terrorists to attack people in Burkina Faso, while on the other side of that coin, Russia is sending military troops to help combat terrorism? It should be a day of reflection on our place in the empire and how we can contribute to enlightening people. Because in an age of information, that's the most powerful weapon you can wield other than a gun, and sometimes even more powerful. Because if they can't control your information, if they can't manipulate you with lies, they can't get you to push for their wars, to push for their atomic bombs, to push for their CIA narratives, to push for their regime change wars. That's how we win. We win with the truth. And the truth is, I don't care which country you're from, there is no Victory Day without Russia and the sacrifice of those people. If you're in the US, call in 1-844-944-3344. UK 08081965522. Worldwide 0044-203-966-2625. I'm Niko House, standing in for George Galloway, and you're watching the mother of all talk shows.